and welcome to the Disability Education and Society podcast. This is a podcast for collective learning and unlearning in the struggle for intersectional liberation. We focus on educational realms, expanding to other societal areas. We share our stories as academics as well as those of our featured guests, including disability activists involved with multifaceted dimensions of systems equity, self-determination efforts, anti-ableist, and anti-racist liberation. Join us as co-conspirators. Today's episode features Offir Romero. Offir is a teaching and research assistant in the mathematics department at Western Michigan University, where he is also a mathematics education second-year Ph.D. student. He graduated in 2018 with a BA in mathematics education from Francisco Morazan National Pedagogical University, which resides in his native country, Honduras. During his bachelor's degree, he participated in a student exchange for 10 months at Uppsala University in Sweden. Later, he completed his Master's of Science in Pure Mathematics at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez campus. Nowadays, he is a member of the Empowerment and Equity Research Project, which is a collaboration between Western Michigan University, University of Maryland, and Phoenix Public High School in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to do professional development that promotes inclusive environments in mathematics classrooms at the K-12 level. His mathematics education research focus on equity during the teaching-learning process towards students with disabilities and/or exceptional math talent was influenced by his experience being a student and mathematics teacher with cerebral palsy.
Well, Offir, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, the Disability Education Society podcast. We are so thrilled to have you here. We're thrilled to also celebrate your birthday, which occurred 2 days ago. So happy birthday again, Offir, and hopefully we're going to have a celebratory type of a conversation today. So the theme of our conversation is Latinx Diasporas in supporting mathematics teachers to challenge intersectional oppression. So to begin, we would like, Offir, you to share a little bit about yourself as in perhaps like a personal story related to your disability journey.
Well, thank you so much, Pablo and Alexis, and thank you all the people that is around this magnificent project. Well, I am from Honduras. I did born in Tegucigalpa, which is the capital of Honduras, and I have a disability called cerebral palsy. Well, the specific name is infantile cerebral palsy, and it was promoted by some event that occurs when I got birth. Um, so, for example, in that time, my mom was ready to give me birth. I don't know what is the word pronunciation in English, but through Sixery.
How do you say that in English, Paulo? The Caesar process, the process of giving birth through an operation where they open up the abdomen and
The cesarean section,
the
right?
Yeah,
C-section, yeah.
right, the cesarean section.
I was planning to give birth in that process, but at the moment, the doctors wanted to do the opposite things. So I was got birth normally, and in my case, I was a little baby, which implies that my mom struggled at the moment of good birth. In my case, they forced me by negligence uh, in this process, and for that reason, there exists a moment in which you need to go out from the womb of the mom, and I couldn't go out at the moment. And in this period, I was losing oxygen in my brain. So I needed to stay days in intensive care after this, trying to be recovered for this process. And I was the first baby my mom had. So for that reason, she was like an expert in this process. And the doctors didn't say anything about it. They didn't say that a problem occurred, just gave to me to my parents. And at the time, I mean, after several months, my mom, who at the time was studying special education in Honduras, started to see some behavior in myself, in my movements, in my coordination abilities, uh, that I was not doing what is normal in babies. I'm talking about sit down, I'm talking about rolling or having this strength in the body for walking, or standing up, running at the time. So after she saw that, they started to see a diagnosis in hospitals, in rehabilitation centers, and many diagnoses were given, but the official one was cerebral palsy. Um, Even I was 5 years old. I went to Mexico because my mom started the master's degree on there. She developed the master's degree on there, and with my dad, we went to that place, and at that country, many exams were developed to me, and doctors were like very impressed because I could start walk at the age of 3 years, which was like very impressive for a baby having cerebral palsy. Even the statistics of 2003 says that the 95% of people around the world that has cerebral palsy cannot walk. They needs to be in a wheelchair or something for like mobilization. And I was part at the moment of the 5% that could walk. So it was very impressed. Um, and yeah, I have started like develop my skills because cerebral palsy is not something about the cognitive part, but it's about motor skills and coordination. So in my whole life, I have learned to develop um, each day more skills. So it has been a good time living and overcoming limitations, and with the help of my family. I am a believer person, so with the help of God, I have came to the position I have now.
Thank you, Ofir. I really appreciate this story because I think it helps us dive into our next question, which connects to the issue of diasporas, Latinx diasporas. Everybody talks here about the African diaspora or even the Asian diasporas, but very few people think of landmark transnationalism as a diasporic process. Um, and in many cases, um, these diasporas have to do with disability situations where uh, people are looking for opportunities, better opportunities for their kids with disabilities, or um, challenges around uh, the kind of treatments they seek for their folks with disabilities, and of course, in some cases, you get Latinx folks who don't move at all, but like the folks in New Mexico or Southern Colorado, who are Latinx by birth in terms of their heritage, but they never experience any diasporic process except for um, the combination of um, colonizing processes they underwent, sometimes in combination with indigenous groups, like what happened to the Pueblo tribes. And but I just want to emphasize the complexities of both what each country in Latin America has in terms of resources, and also the diversity of experiences of what it means to be Latinx in Latin America or in the United States. As I said, sometimes without moving from the United States, there is a lot of Latinx folks who were born here and have been here for 300, 400 years. In fact, the people in Santa Fe um, have been in the United States even before the United States existed with the 13 colonies. I'd like to ask you a question around the sense of diaspora and the uniqueness of Honduras uh, in terms of where you see Honduras being in the map of cultural perceptions towards disability, and how that impacts resources in general, but especially what happens with teachers um, in their interactions with folks with disabilities.
And yeah, I think that is an interesting behavior. Uh, Maybe, I mean, since my perspectives in the United States, if we try um, to think about what has been like more focused in terms of equity issues or discrimination or these type of things, uh, has been more, I don't know, maybe I can be wrong in the United States, but it seems to be more about race. But in Honduras has been more about disability. It's like disability has been some issue that I mean the disability studies has been developed since the last, I think, 30 years, and they are working too hard. I can say that because my mom, as I told you, is a special educator, and many programs has been created. And I am going to uh, do a brief of the benefits or good points that uh, um, disability students has given to the country. So special schools and programs have been created, and it seems that the language has been more inclusive around the perceptions with disability. Because I remember when I was like a baby, 5 years, I was in kinder, and many people, when I fell down, said, "Oh, please help him because he is sick. He is a little sick." And this terminology that when you are, I mean, being a child, you start believing that you are sick because you have not this um, ability to think about your perception, your self perception. So, but now I think that people has been more conscious about it. So people are trying to not say people with disability, sorry, sick people or something like that, but people with disability. And also, maybe in Spanish can make some difference more than English, but they don't say disabled people or personas discapacitadas. So it's true that is the translation in Spanish, but they say people with disabilities, personas con discapacidad. And this terminology has been given by uh, special educators, people that work in disability studies, because they want to focus uh, referring to people with disability as the humanity of the people with disability instead of the disability itself, because they believe that disability is part of the humanity of person. So I cannot say, okay, for 5 minutes I can leave cerebral palsy and I leave cerebral palsy in the corner and then I can take it out, right? So they believe that it's part of the humanity, and for that reason, they have developed these beneficial things. But in the other parts, um, many of the, I mean, special educators are not in all the schools, which implies that there are many schools who has not someone that is trying to guarantee this equity promotion in the classroom, and many teachers have like 50 students, 40 students, and they struggle thinking that some student with disability can come to that classroom. So they are in this social model of disability, as we know in disability studies, but they don't feel prepared for it, and since they don't feel prepared, they try to avoid the experience. So I have listened many cases saying I would like that my student can be in a regular classroom. However, the teachers said that they have not the enough knowledge or the enough preparation, or the school has no any preparation for it, and they are recommending me to put my child in a special school. So it is good having a special schools. However, in many cases, a student cannot be prepared for the life, right? For the diversity of students. So there is a lot of work to do in there, and this is the role of the disability studies, and it's part of our work.
Right. There are two things that occurred to me as a response to your question, which is kind of generating more questions. Um, one is, I mean, one of the consequences of that, and I think this is probably applicable to many global South countries, is that because some general educators don't want to take these um, students with disabilities, many of them are deprived from education in the strict sense. I, for example, in Venezuela, was able to go to a boarding school for the blind only because there was a single school in the whole country that didn't require uniforms. I remember trying to go to another school in Caracas, and my family couldn't afford their uniforms. The sort of the initial bureaucracy of trying to enter. I think it was about 500 bolivars in that time in the 1970s, which is um, more than what a working class person would make in 2, 3 months in those days. So it was a huge amount of money, uh, and I, I I was able to go to this particular school that was very much underfunded, but they didn't have requirements of that sort. Um, so uh, it was a tiny opportunity, and without that experience, I would probably just have go begging, which was the expectation for most of the blind folks in the time when I grew up. Blind folks would just beg in the streets, or they would sell they call them cuadros sellados. These horse racing. Um, they were like little forms that people would fill out, but they would come already filled out and sold by the blind, and people had the belief that buying it from the blind would give them some luck, to get some um, money through these cuadros sellados, or lottery tickets, which is also some other experience that many blind folks underwent. The other route that blind folks would have was to become a musician, some kind of street musician, and make some money, doing some gigs here and there. So, I mean, that's one first reaction that I have to your comment of fear. But the other comment that I want to make, and this is a question to try to challenge you a little bit. So I know, for instance, that in Honduras, um, in the Atlantic coast, you have some groups that are very racialized. What's the name for these Black indigenous groups that you have in Honduras, in the
Garífunas,
coast? Yeah,
garífunas,
yeah, Orifunas,
garífunas.
that Garifunas, right? I mean, imagine that you have somebody with disabilities. It doesn't matter which kind of disability we're talking about. Would you say that their experience within the schooling system would be different to what other mestizos or uh, non-black uh, populations? Somebody was telling me recently about Guatemala, that they have a group that they call Ladinos. I don't know if you have that category, which is kind of a yeah, just to distinguish between the purely indigenous folks and the Ladinos, which are, from what I understand, not really an equivalent to our mestizos in the rest of Latin America. So I mean, it sounds like there are some very racialized segments of the population. I'm sure that if you mingle that with disabilities, you're likely to face more complex intersectional reactions that would emphasize the inequities that would affect somebody like you who was in the capital and probably had, um, I mean, in the middle of that situation, a little bit of privilege, if you know what I mean. Could you react to that in terms of perceptions and how you see that connection between race and disability in Honduras playing
Mhm.
out?
Hi there. While we intend to make our podcast as accessible as possible, we ask those that have the financial means to support us by subscribing as a patron to our podcast for as little as $5 a month. To subscribe, go to our website, disabilityed.podbean.com. By subscribing as a patron, you will help ensure that we can continue to create and share new episodes while supporting other co conspirators who face financial and health difficulties. For those with financial difficulties, please connect with us about obtaining a free copy of our books and or engaging in additional conversations with us. You can also support this show by hitting the follow button. Share this podcast with among your network and leave us a comment and positive rating. Your support means so
I
much.
will tell you this just since my perspective and the experience I have had. Uh, I think, as I told you, that there is more. I mean, if if there exists discrimination, there will be more in Honduras focused about the disability than the race. And maybe putting the example of the Garifunas, I have Garifunas friends here in the United States and Honduras. Um, they have as many ethnicities because in Honduras we have eight ethnicities. and each of them may have their own language. So you put in me the example of the Garifuna, but I will put another example about the mosquitoes. The mosquitoes
Mm.
is an ethnicity in the east coast of Honduras, which is a jungle, and they have their own language that is mosquitoes. So having their own language when they try to go to the universities to enter in the higher education, they may struggle a little bit with the language, as we struggle, for example, a little bit coming here, since Spanish cannot be our native language. And in Honduras, many programs, I will tell you that because I have worked in mathematics, and I know that there has been some programs trying to develop mathematical teaching skills, not only in Spanish but in their language, to try to provide education quality in their sons. So I think that. Um, the language can be one of the most difficult parts they may struggle in another Honduras places more than the race. Uh, and I think that is the experience I have had because I have had classmates, very funny classmates, and also mosquitoes and from another ethnicities.
Right. There is a book. There is a thinker from who writes a book about Nicaragua, and Myers is the last name. And he makes some claims about mosquitoes being sort of cut in the political situation of Nicaragua, depending on which groups they favor politically, how that changes the dynamics for whether they are supported or not supported in terms of programs. I mean, one of the things about Latin America that I think it's important for everybody here in the United States to understand, and globally, I think this is true for global South countries in general, is that institutions are very vulnerable. It's easy for countries to change from a decade to another, depending on what sort of political regime gets installed in the country. And I think that that's another source of volatility for educational purposes, for many other purposes. We had in Venezuela a defunding of the old university systems that was in place, the autonomous universities that used to be um, more disconnected from government um, initiatives. Because of that, they went to fund the Bolivarian universities that were invented by uh, the folks who were trying to implement what they call the socialism of the 21st century in the case of Venezuela. And all of these things are very impactful in terms of the volatility of what happens to many of these nations. How do you see um, these experiences of influencing what happens to Latinx immigrants in the United States in terms of their funds of knowledge and in terms of the sort of things that they could bring in terms of disability that they could help enrich the discussions and also perhaps even programmatic things that could happen here in the United States that would be relevant to this conversation, so that people can bring home all these um, analytical things that we're bringing up about global South countries, and realizing that these are um, elements that are impacting the educational system here as well.
Yeah, I think that I don't know how far it's related to what I would say right now, but the culture is something that has structured the perception towards students with disabilities, toward people with disabilities. And I would tell you, many professors, even here, uh, feels, as I told you, the lack of preparation in their undergrad or their pedagogical spaces around disability studies. So they fear and they say, okay, I have this student with disability, how I can train the student, how I can guarantee that student is learning. Um, and I think that the start of this or try to avoid this party is to be willing in attend student with disabilities. To say, okay, maybe I don't know what the disability the student has conceived, but I will enter in the world and I will try to provide the enough um, conditions or accommodations in order the student can learn, not putting the demand lower, but putting the conditions that student can like develop the cognitive skills. Um, I remember, for example, sometimes I was tutoring in the Math Olympics program in Honduras, and I remember one girl was my student, and there was an exam, but since the walls of the room was very white and very bright, um, she was struggling with the light, and the bride uh, was made her able to think to analyze because she was very struggling with the light. And I remember that the room has a dark sun with some bricks, some brown bricks, and there was a little ceiling in that part. And I decided to put her in that place. I mean, I didn't know what was the disability she has, but I tried to create some accommodations to him. Even I was not prepared at the time about the disability, and it worked.
Mm,
So I think that the willing is important to develop inclusive environments for students with disability, but also this culture about in my case, I will tell you, being a man with disabilities.
mm,
In Latin America, uh, the population might struggle about it, and I have had a few experience, real few, but I think that if we don't say those experience and we don't show these issues, so we are not advancing to inclusion experience in which people have told me that they doubt that I can develop myself in the academic and professional space because having that disability, they may think that my professors are passing me in the courses
mm,
because of my disability stand instead of the abilities one can develop or even in the personal area of my life that I have some people who doubt that I can be a houseman, a man of family, because I cannot do these motorial things that a traditional man, if we can say that, can do in the home. So a perception about masculinity and disability can create a choke in some minds, but that's what I am. I mean, I am an independent man, and this is another one. They confuse the definition of independency. They think that independency means that you don't need the help of other, but the definition in the dictionary about independency is to be able to provide your own opinion and defend that opinion.
Right.
So, I mean, if we can avoid these stereotypes and paradigms, I think we could improve in our environments, either in education and life.
Yeah, I just find it fascinating as you were talking about the Latinx diaspora and how Alexis, you mentioned how it really depends on the regime, so the social political nature. And Offir, you mentioned your experiences growing up in Honduras and how that has kind of contrasted in some ways your experiences here in the United States. And you touched in upon these stereotypes, which is something that's really interesting as well. I did want to share a little bit about the other diaspora, which have some familiarity with, but not fully, and I guess just a surface level familiarity, which is the Asian diaspora, which in some ways, some of the Asian countries are considered global South, some are not. They're global North kind of contexts. And if you talk about the East Asian countries, then you could think about like how education is traditionally very performative, based on the national exam at a certain point in time, and the pressure to pass that exam. And so, I can't help but to think about like some of my experiences in consulting with some of the Asian countries about like we don't have a special education system here. I mean, we focus a lot on students who are non-disabled and getting them to perform, but yet we do have awareness that we need to support our disabled students better. And now we're turning to the United States and folks like you who have expertise in special education. And then I worry that a lot of times when they turn to the special education in the US, it worries because I'm very critical of the special education system in the US, and that you are then taking the dominant special education system. And so when they ask me, I think they're expecting that dominant system, and are, I think, very surprised when I come to say, hey, look, this is, you don't want to replicate our special education system here. To be honest, you want to do, if you're starting from scratch, there are so many great opportunities. So this is just to say, just kind of contrast some of the things that are going on in some of the countries that I've been working with, and their hesitancy, if you will, to adopt a more critical approach to special education. I think the stereotypes that we are going to talk about next are still very prevalent in Asian country. I think maybe to a greater degree, I think, just from listening to you to describe, because being very hyper capitalistic, I would say, some of the countries, they don't see any uses, if you will, of disabled folks. That they are there are even languages, as we talk about, that they're very derogatory, that describe disabled people. And Sandy Ho has written about this in a chapter in the Disability Visibility book by Alice Wong. And so for those that want to learn more about it, I refer to that work. So just to kind of briefly mention the other diaspora here
Right.
in the space.
And I want to mention, I invited Paulo to watch this movie. Are you familiar with Un Cuento Chino is the name in Spanish? It's an Argentinian movie. Have you seen it, Ophir? Um, it
No, I haven't.
it's yeah. I think you should watch it. It's an interesting case for the tendency in Latin America to be also discriminatory against the Asian groups. And of course, in many Latin American countries, everybody's Chinese. It doesn't matter if they're from Japan or Korea or whichever other country. And this particular um, movie sort of recreates some of those dynamics of racism um,
Yeah.
that the Asians would experience in the Latin
Uh,
American context. This one happening in Argentina, but I think it really covers vast portions of the country. So I think it's a very interesting when it comes to all these forms of racialization, and of course, if that combines with disability, you can lead it can lead to inequities. Um, so, Paulo, do you think we have some time to talk a little bit about the stereotypes?
Yeah, we can talk
Yeah.
about it because I think I diverted the conversation a little, and there's so much we could talk about with the contrasting of different countries in this world context. Uh, Alexis was able to offer a great article that is very relevant to our conversation today, and I'm sharing the screen here so that folks who are engaging in the podcast via video could see the article that I'm referring to, the title of which is Cultural Stereotypes of Disabled and Non-Disabled Men and Women, Consensus for Global Category Representations and Diagnostic Domains. So very relevant to what we just have been talking about. And this article is written by Michelle R. Nario Redmond from Reed College in Portland, Oregon, USA. And so, Afir, some of the things that I think are important that are relevant for the conversation, and we want to ask you about, because you do a lot of work with teacher perceptions and how some of the stereotypes come through, if you will, in teacher perceptions and teacher education programs, specifically mathematics. And so, just a quick rundown. I mean, the article finds that disabled folks are stereotyped as dependent, incompetent, and asexual largely. And I mean, there are some really interesting findings here. But again, we just wanted to ask you, Afir, how do you see some of these stereotypes playing out in the work that you do?
yeah, so first of all, our work focus on the teacher's perception affecting the behavior at the time when students are participating in the class. So it is about how we can describe the perceptions as an inclusive ones or non-inclusive one when the teacher said a mathematical problem in this case and a student with disability raised their hand or tried to present some results either from individual or group work, and then we try to create uh, scenarios, um, these kind of scenarios in order to ask the teachers three questions. First of all, what comes to your mind after the participation of the students, or even before? If you just see the students are raising the hands, or you know that students is raising the hands, and student has a particular disability, what would come to your mind is the first question. And in that question, maybe teachers honestly may think many things related to the results that are in the paper. For example, uh, if the student has an uninclusive examples, then can like even relate, not in the discourse, but in their mind about that students are very passive and being passive. So for that reason, they won't participate. Or if they are participating, it's because other classmates help them to have a response, but not a response that is from them. So, and non-inclusive perceptions uh, are claiming that students are in the class, but they are not participating in the class, which is the difference between the last two lenses of social interaction applying in the educational system between integration and inclusion. Integration claims that the students are in the classroom, but it doesn't imply that students are contributors in the classroom. So, an inclusive perception claims that students with disabilities are not just members in the classroom, but also contributors in the mathematical knowledge. In this case, contextualized in the mathematical classroom. So I think that many professors, if they don't have an inclusive perception, have this idea of student with disability being uh, passive, incompetent, lazy, vulnerable. And if we, for example, think about the social model of disability that we talked a little before, um, teachers may think that students with disabilities are vulnerable, and for that reason, they don't want their participation because if they got wrong, it seems to the teachers another opportunity to be more vulnerable instead of an opportunity to make I mean, and yes, an opportunity to make that disconception in a learning moment for everyone, trying to don't shame the student, but also try to see what the student is thinking and why I are the reasons in his thinking that makes him go to that direction, to that answer. So I believe that many teachers say, oh no, he has, for example, mathematical disabilities or even cerebral palsy. They think that cerebral palsy can be related to the cognitive part instead of the motor skills. And for that reason, they say, okay, if I accept the participation of the student, I will say that is right. Even the answer cannot be right totally because they want to provide students confidence, but in the same way, they are not doing uh, the the effort of the developmental skills, which refers to the social model. So yeah, I think that even we don't have the power to hear what the teachers are thinking in their minds, maybe the actions and questions like these three: what it comes to my mind, what you do next, and why did you do, can reflect if teachers are thinking something related to the answers in the article that claims that promotes that non-inclusive perception or an inclusive perception made the student a contributor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Afir. That's so fascinating work, and I can't wait to for others to learn about some of the things that you're doing, and for those results to come out. And thank you for making the connections to the stereotypes that you will maybe looking for in the research that you're doing. we do want to honor your time. I know we have spoken a really rich conversation here today, and we can have this conversation for many more hours, and we didn't get through many of the questions we wanted to pose to you, but I think those who are engaging with the podcast would just be just so honored just to have the privilege to think through some of the conversations we had today. So to close, Offir, is there some if people want to find out more about the work that you're doing, and is there like a way they could connect with you?
Yeah, I have my account in ResearchGate. When I try to post the writings we do, articles, conference papers. So my name in ResearchGate is Offir Romero Castro. Offir with two F. Also in LinkedIn, the same name, Offir Romero Castro. And in that place, I am like developing some publications about the work we are doing about perceptions.
All right.
Wonderful. Offir, it's been a real pleasure for us to learn with you.
Thank you so much for engaging with the DES podcast. We post new episodes every few weeks. The DES podcast is made possible and sustainable in solidarity with you and those who generously volunteer their time to converse with us. We hope you join us on our next episode.